All right, I see Zach has jumped in here, so I'm going to go ahead and promote him to a co-host. And once he's a co-host, then he can share his screen and his mic. So let's see here. Hey, Zach, can you hear me? Can you see me? Welcome, welcome. If you should be able to share your camera now. There it is, the one and only. Woo!
Zach, for whatever reason, I can't hear you,
Oh no, you can't hear me.
but I'm going
Try.
to, I guess
Let's
I'm going to
see.
just do this.
Yeah, that'll probably did that work?
That works. Now I
There
can hear you
it is.
loud and
Woo!
clear.
There we go.
No suspenders.
Yeah. Yeah. So good.
Busted. Busted.
You
No
are busted.
suspenders.
Yeah, you're better go put them on real quick.
Sorry. Well, I'm already frazzled enough. I was having trouble getting into the Zoom.
Oh
Apparently,
no.
I
Sorry
have
about
multiple
that.
accounts.
Sorry. Yeah, I know that's always the trouble. The trouble with Zoom, it's like once you're logged in with one, it's hard to like get out into a different account, and it's like you only have certain access with some of them. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
tough.
no excuses at this point. If we're this far into COVID and everything else and Zoom and I still can't figure it out, I mean, it's on me. So,
Well, no worries. I think my computer did the same thing where it was trying to use my microphone as the speaker earlier today, and so I was like, I can't hear you. What's going on? So, but you're able to just plug your headphones right into it. I don't think I might have that, but yeah, good stuff. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time because you got an awesome presentation that you're going to be talking through, and a lot of people are looking forward to that there. So, I guess I'll let you take it away.
all right. Thanks for doing this. It's an honor. I'm uh
Absolutely.
I'm totally flattered to be invited, and yeah, I think that there's a lot to talk about right now. It's a
There
very
sure is.
exciting time to talk about tiny houses. So,
Yep, definitely. And we're always stoked to have you a part of it, and you bring just a lighthearted funness to it. So we love it. And but with a lot of deep quality
oh yeah,
information. So
that was a good save right there because,
yes.
I mean, but it's true. Like if you got nothing else, you might as well, bring a good time. And
Yep.
sometimes I have to just resort to that but
Yep.
today
That's
is
good.
not one of those moments. Today, there's just so much going on in the world as it relates to housing in general. So it's actually a very exciting time for me. So
Yep.
yeah,
Well, I'm
I'll
gonna
get
let you
I'll
get
get to
after
it.
it.
Yeah. So before you go, I guess I can see the chats here. Um, I can see that there's already a few little comments. There's some snarky ones from Nick Mosley. That's to be expected. Um, but yeah, if you guys want to leave snarky comments, that's great. That helps me not take things too seriously. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of get into it, and I'm going to say that I'm going to try to leave some time at the end of this to kind of have a discussion, and trying to um essentially just like actually allow you guys to have some little bit of input in this, and then also ask some questions. So thanks, Victoria. Um, you know, one of the things that I think is happening right now in the tiny house world is that we're at this kind of crossroads, I feel, which is that, you know, for a lot of kind of the mainstream world that got really excited about tiny houses in the beginning, I think that there's been this kind of like almost unsaid consensus that tiny houses are kind of a thing that was really a big fad that's kind of reached its crescendo, and it's kind of dipped down. And what I believe very strongly is that, the fundamental factors that created the people's interest in tiny homes have not gone anywhere. Actually, they're just gotten even more extreme today than they ever were before. And so tiny homes, in terms of talking about them as basically a tool for society to try to address some of these big issues that we're dealing with, is more relevant right now than it's ever been before. And so that's kind of an exciting thing. And I think what also has been, something that I've noticed, and think hopefully people also out there have noticed, is that, housing and concerns about housing, these things that I've been kind of really beating the drum on for the last 8, 9 years, working with veterans with Operation Tiny Home, working with the Tiny Home Industry Association. This housing crisis that we're dealing with has turned from being just kind of one of many subjects that people are concerned about to being really like kind of at the top of everybody's level of what they're focused on. And especially this year being, an election year, it's just been really exciting for me to see people starting to take it seriously, because I think that it's long overdue. I think that so much of what we're dealing with out there in society, from people's concerns about homelessness to crime, obviously homelessness, but even more like economy, the inflation that we've been struggling with, so much of it, and also our inability to address, inequality, climate change, all of this stuff, the way that I see it, it kind of roots and comes from our issues with housing and our inability to start to really move forward with some real solutions. And that's why I very much believe that tiny homes are, far from kind of hit their crescendo in terms of their relevance. And instead, I think that we're actually hopefully at a tipping point where we can actually move forward with changing tiny homes from being a bit of a fringe movement and what people think is a fad to actually being just another element in the housing structure of our country that enables people to make, just pragmatic decisions about their lives and how they want to live. And so I'm going to kind of get started. That being said, I'm just kind of alluding to the fact that we are really having tiny homes in the conversation, not just in the media, but also politicians kind of across the country. The housing crisis has moved from something that is just kind of fringe and on the coasts to being something that is just ubiquitous around the country and you can't escape it. And I think that's the big difference, is that, everybody is having issues with housing, and that's why we're really at the point where we are. And when you look out there in the kind of the political landscape, you'll see that actually both sides of the political spectrum are agreeing on one thing, and that's that we have a housing shortage, right? And that is a really big step forward, because before we in order to have any kind of solutions, first you have to acknowledge that there actually is an issue, and I think we've gotten to that point. And so now here we're at a space where so many people are looking at the problem, but not actually looking at anything new in terms of a solution. And that's where it's really nice to be a tiny home advocate, because we can say, hey, we're not just here to point out all the issues. We're going to point out all the issues, and then we're going to actually offer something concrete that can allow us to move forward. And so basically, what I see out there is basically a consensus that we have not been building enough homes, right? There's this housing crisis, and when you talk to people, economists, about what it is and where it came from, people are basically in agreement, left and right of the political center, that we have not been building enough homes to keep up with the demand. And I feel like that is kind of a misread of what is going on and where the impetus of the housing crisis is coming from. Because as you know, I'm somebody who is really focused on efficient use of resources, efficient use of spaces. And Mark, yeah, you're basically, I see a comment over here commenting already. You're getting into my talk. 16 million vacant homes in the US as of 2022. Yes, vacancy is something that we'll get into, right? The definition of a vacant home is, there's a lot of homes that are on the rental market that haven't been rented yet. That's considered a vacant home. There's homes that are being used for vacation rentals. Those are considered vacant homes. And then also the vacant homes that people are just having as second homes. So a lot of the investment homes out there are actually considered vacant, even if there is some intention to use them. That being said, there's another thing that's happening, right? And I'm going to go into my little handy dandy slideshow. You guys are going to luck out. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Sharing my screen here. All right. So can you guys see this? Hopefully you can see it. I think I know what I'm doing enough. I'm going to go view, play slideshow here. All right. So what we have going on here is I'm going to be talking about some of the uncomfortable truths of the housing crisis. And I don't know why it's showing my chat and everything up at the top of my screen. I think you guys are probably seeing that it's over.
No, it
Yeah.
looks good to us.
It looks good to you. Okay. Well, it's a little weird for me, but maybe I will just try to move this so I can see it. Okay, here we go. That's better for me. Um, Play slideshow. All right, I'll try not to bore you guys too much. So, there is a situation that's happened with our housing crisis, and it's not in my mind necessarily that we have been not building enough homes. It's that we've been building the wrong type of homes in comparison with the direction of our demographic changes over the last 5 decades, 6 decades, if you really want to go get nuanced about it. And right now, what we have is that about 50% of all homeowners in our country are 60 years or older. And if you go back in history, I mean, even in the year 2000, that number was about 24%. So we've doubled the number of homeowners, the percentage of homeowners in our country that are of the older generations. And, this generation, the baby boomers, is a big bubble in the population, but they still only represent 22% of the population. Represents about 50% of the homeowners. And these homes are by and large the larger homes, right? Older homeowners, they have more equity, they've had a chance to make more money, so they're living in, by and large, the larger homes out there in our country. And 80% of them are living in one or two person households, right? So a huge percentage of the larger homes in our country are being occupied by older Americans who are living in them with just one or two people. And so this is one of the areas that I see as being a real opportunity in terms of allowing us to navigate our housing needs without having to necessarily resort to just keeping on building and building more homes. Because what we can do is engage policies that help us utilize those homes more efficiently. And when you look at okay, so yeah, so there's a breakdown of the homes investment properties. Oh yeah, okay. And in addition to representing 47% of the homeowners, they also own 50% of investment properties. And so as you can see, the investment property issue is a big one. People like to blame our housing crisis on the kind of private equity and corporate investors entering the housing market. But as you'll see, the amount of older homeowners that own second homes that are typically investment properties is now up to 35%. And that means that there is a huge amount of these investment properties that are basically contributing to the vacancy issue of our housing. Investment properties represent 18% of our total housing stock. And as you can see, only 3.5% of them are owned by private equity or corporate investors, and 96.5% of investment properties are actually owned by private individuals, 50% of which are age 60 and older. And this kind of goes into what I believe is not really talked about when people mention the housing crisis, and that's just that as a culture we've transitioned from using our homes as a thing that is important for our livelihoods and place to live in as basically an investment asset, something that we pour all of our life savings in with this hope that it's going to be this ever appreciating asset. And, for the most part, it has. So you can't blame anyone for doing that. when you look at the breakdown of investment properties, you'll see that uh, actually vacation homes is only about 10%. And those are the ones that are truly vacant, right? A vacation home, they're not being rented, they're not being used on Airbnb. These are people's second homes. And, I would say that a lot of the appreciation that we've seen in the last 30 years has made this much more viable for people to be able to purchase a home, not necessarily have to live in there. And just because of the ever increasing value of housing, it means that the value of that home is outpacing the cost in terms of maintenance and everything else. And so it's basically helped people justify just owning homes, taking it off the market, even though they're just really not using it at all. Um, Now you'll notice 17.5% of investment properties are being used for vacation rentals. So that's Airbnb and VRBO in comparison with the 3.5 that are owned by corporate investors and private equity. So, if you're going to be throwing around blame for our housing crisis, what I believe is that, you know, corporate investors, although I have no love for that process, I have no love for what is happening. And it is an issue specifically in specific markets where basically private equity and corporate investors are buying up a large percentage of specifically the rental market in certain areas and jacking up the price. I mean, that is a really big problem. I'm not going to discount it. But when you look at the overall housing supply and the amount of homes that are just removed from the housing stock, the housing supply that people can essentially buy, it's the Airbnbs and the VRBOs that are having a much bigger effect. So here you can see the amount of investor homes, investment properties that are owned by people that are 60 and older. Over about 25% are being used as just basically second homes. And then 75% are being rented out or used as a vacation rental. And that's a lot larger than the total population or the total amount of the investment properties, which is 10% that are being used as vacation homes. So again, older Americans are having this very outsized impact in terms of the housing supply, especially when you're looking at the amount of home per person. So here you have a chart showing basically what has happened over time in terms of square footage, right? Our family sizes have been going down at the same time as our home sizes have been growing. And so at the same time that we have this housing crisis, we're also living in a world where our square footage per person is higher than it's ever been in the United States. And when you look at the square footage per person of older Americans, because their homes are so much bigger, it's definitely a lot. I mean, it's not crazy much more than the average, but it's quite a bit more than the average. And what it really means is that, I mean, and this is a true statement, at the same time that we're having this massive housing crisis, older Americans are the most overhoused population in the history of humanity. And that is something that is really not talked about. I don't think it's very popular for politicians to really bring this up because, well, older Americans are a very influential group of people that are very politically active. And so to try to point this out feels a lot like it's pointing the finger and throwing blame on people, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just recognizing that there's this real dynamic that's going on in our country where the younger generations are being squeezed and people are in rental homes where you're getting packed, right, with roommates and living in, like, the hallway and under the stairs. And, you know, okay, those are things that I've done personally. I'm just using my own example. But people, especially in rental situations, are getting packed into homes, and then people on the other side of the affluence are living with more square footage than they know what to do with. They're having vacation homes and investment properties that they barely ever go to. And so it's this really interesting dynamic. And I don't point it out to kind of point fingers. What I'm trying to say is that if we're not realistic about the actual causes of our housing crisis, it's not going to help us make informed decisions moving forward about figuring out the best solutions. And so I want to kind of get back into how we got here. And I'm going to just take you through it pretty quickly so I don't bore you. Here is a chart from 1950s that just shows the household breakdown in terms of the percentage of homes that are lived in by married couples without children, single adults, nuclear families. You can see in the 1950s, you know, the biggest single demographic by far was nuclear families, with 43% of the homes being occupied by single families. Single adults only represented 10%. And I'm going to just kind of tap through every tap is 10 years, and just watch this chart as it kind of changes over time. So here we go. And you'll see now all the way up here into 2024, the percentage of nuclear families has really shifted, and the percentage of single adults is almost matching the amount of homes that are being lived in by families. You know, parent households have grown a little bit, but it's not been nearly as much as these other areas, especially the amount of single adults occupying homes by themselves. And when you look at the older generation, it's actually far higher than 23%. It's nearly 40% of all homes owned by people 60 and older are being occupied by just one person. And now remember, most of those homes are either 3 or 4 bedroom housing. Actually, we haven't quite gotten there. And so here's a look at the percentage of the different generations that are either homeowners or renters. And you can see the silent generation, baby boomers, are definitely the largest group of homeowners. Generation X is doing pretty well. But keep in mind, Generation X, I'm Generation X. I am going to be turning 45 this year, but I'm the last year. And the oldest Generation Xers are going to be turning 60 this year. So they're kind of getting into that position of falling into the category of older Americans, as much as I hate to admit it. And then you go down to millennials and Gen Zs, and you know, by far the majority are living as renters and not homeowners. And this is, you know, nothing new that anybody on this call doesn't already know, but it's kind of nice to just see the breakdown here. And then when you look at the household size, right? Okay. So 80% of silent generation are living in 1 or 2 person households. 75% of the baby boomers are. And then you go down into the younger generations, and it gets progressively more and more are living in homes with 3 or more person. Um, you know, that obviously has always been the case. But it's never been to this degree before. I was noticing, I was looking up in 1970, the amount of single people living by themselves was between 8 and 10%. And now the amount of single people, right, was well over 23%. So it's more than doubled in terms of the amount of people living by themselves. And I would argue that it's not necessarily doing us any favors, right? We know that loneliness is at also epidemic levels. I saw something that said that loneliness is killing more people than stroke and heart attack or stroke and lung cancer combined. And you know, that's a kind of funny statistic that's hard to really quantify. I don't know why they used that. I think it was just kind of shocking. But it's undeniable that loneliness is a real issue in our country, especially for older populations. And I'm just going to flat out say that I think the way that we are constructing our homes, the way that we've laid out our cities, the way that we're occupying our spaces is having a real significant impact on that. I think a lot of people, when they see those issues with loneliness, they want to blame uh, uh, social media and things like that. And I think that that is essentially a way to deflect responsibility from having kind of internalizing what our own policies, especially our housing policies, have done to the way that we live and the way that we interact with one another. There was a really interesting part of a book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, where there was a city, I think in Pennsylvania or something, and it was, I forget when the study was done, but they had really low levels of heart disease. And there was a commission study by the government to figure out, okay, what is this city doing that is contributing to these, like, low levels of heart disease? And they came back kind of scratching their head. And the only thing that they could find different about that city versus other places that were very similar was that the houses had been built at a point when they didn't have big backyards. All the yards were at the front, and they had these big porches that faced the front. And essentially the scientists came back and said, hey, the only thing that we can think of that might be contributing to this is that everybody goes out and they sit in their front porch for dinner, and then people walk their dogs by and everybody waves to each other, and it seems like everybody really knows each other, and it's probably because of the way that the homes are laid out in the neighborhoods. And I think that that is um, a really good example of the power that the way that we design our homes and the way that we design our city can impact our lives for the positive or the negative. And I think the tendency for people to sequester themselves, right? To think about erecting these big fences and then living in these big homes. I don't think that we've been completely forced to reflect on what that actually has done to people's outcomes and people's health. And so I'm at the risk of having this go too long because I really want to have people be able to comment. And I'm going to just say right now, I can't see your chats because I'm in this silly situation where all I can see is my own screen. So we're going to just have to get back to it. Anyways, the distribution of housing types in America is another thing that is worth paying attention to, right? Because at the same time that we've had this change in the demographics, we've been building larger and larger homes. And guys like myself, I'll probably throw Nick into this. I'm sure Nick is to blame too. Spent a good portion of my younger years doing remodels, right? We were taking homes that were kind of, 3-bedroom ranch homes that had already kind of raised a family, and right about the same time that the kids had moved out to college and the parents were living by themselves, well, guess what? Their appreciation had gotten to the point where they had some extra money. They had already always had these long held dreams about what they would do with their home and wanted to remodel it. And so they go ahead and they take their life savings. They pay myself and my buddies to demolish their home, double the size, right at the time that their need for the space is less than it's ever been before. And they're not doing it because they actually have a real need for space. They're doing it, for one, because they want to, because they finally have the assets to kind of go through with these dreams that they've had. But the bigger reason is that they're thinking about their homes as their investment. They're investing in their homes as if it's their retirement savings. And that's another aspect that I'm about to get into that I think is really important, because I believe that the fact that we have taken so much of the country's wealth, of individuals' wealth, of older homeowners, especially the baby boomers' wealth, and invested it into housing, has really kind of left us exposed to any kind of housing downturns because, well, we're relying on the equity that we've built in our homes for retirement. And there's another aspect too, which is that, the baby boomers in particular are this big bubble in the population. And so everybody having the same idea that they're going to invest in their homes, but they're all the same age, and they're sneaking up on that moment where they might actually cash in on their home and take out that money for retirement. If too many people basically cash in on their retirement savings all at once, again, that's why our country is essentially exposed to future housing downturns. But you can see 63% of the of the housing stock are single family homes. Multifamily is 11%, apartment and condos 18%, manufactured homes is 6.5%, which is kind of surprising number to me. I didn't realize it was that big. And then here's us over here in the other types, the 1.5% sliver. That's us over there in the tiny homes. And we're hopefully we're going to grow that because yeah, there's a lot of room to expand here. But the breakdown in terms of the single family homes, in terms of the bedroom size, so you can see the 80% of the single family homes out there in the country are either 3 or more bedrooms, right? Only 1% or 4% of the single family homes have 1 bedroom. Um, and then what is it? 20% are 1 or 2 bedroom homes. And I think this reflects the other thing that's happened over the course of the last, 50 to 70 years, where we've essentially built up rules that make it really basically ineffective. There's no incentive for anyone to build smaller homes. And then you've had guys like me who have kind of made a living taking those smaller homes, demolishing them, remodeling them, tripling the size, and then flipping it, right? This house flipping phenomenon that we've had and it's been so popular in television. This is something that has really impacted our housing stock because it's removed so much of the what we used to call starter homes from our housing supply. And so now if you want to have a house, want to have a starter home, you're essentially looking at going into a multifamily house. And you can see in terms of multifamily homes, this is what this chart is showing. A good percentage of them, 40% are 1 bedroom, 35% are 2 bedrooms. So, we do have smaller housing types. They're just not standalone homes. And I think that this is another thing that is not really talked about enough because a lot of people, especially on the older end of the spectrum, have saved up their whole life to buy a home. They love their home, and they love everything that a single family home offers in terms of the quiet neighborhood, in terms of the yard that you get to have a dog. And these are things that are really hard for people to give up. And that's why basically everyone, I mean, they say it's about 75% of homeowners state that they are intending on living in their home as long as possible. I would say it's even higher than that. I think almost every homeowner is hoping to essentially age in place as long as possible. However, only 26% of the population has a sufficient retirement savings to do so, and we'll get to that. And I think part of the reason that people are so resistant to downsizing for older Americans is essentially a four-letter word at this point. You know, the down is definitely a four-letter word. Sizing is a few more than that, but you get the point. Nobody likes the idea of downsizing, even though historically that was essentially the plan for most everyone, because when you went into retirement, typically people's retirement, they were on a pension, and it meant that you were going to have to live off of less money than you had before. And that meant that you were going to have to find a cheaper way to live, which was downsizing. And a lot of older Americans, especially widowers or widows, uh, would essentially open up their large homes and rent out rooms. Well, that's not so much of part of the culture anymore. And that's another reason why we just have so many of these big homes in the hands of older Americans that are essentially like, sitting empty or being occupied by just 1 or 2 people. Um, Here's the breakdown for apartments. Again, you can see 1 bedroom apartments is actually there's more 1 bedroom apartments than there is anything else. Um, and I think that this also goes into this conversation about desirability. Because if we try to solve the housing crisis and the lack of smaller homes simply by building more apartments and condos, multifamily, what you're not doing is playing to people's desirability. I don't know if that's making very much sense, but to me, a tiny home in a backyard where you got separation from the neighbors, you have everything that is enjoyable about a single family home, only it's just in a smaller footprint. That is the type of thing that I think would turn a lot of kind of skeptics about downsizing into being able to consider it, right? And that's an important concept because that's not really permeating the conversation when it comes to housing, is this desirability. And I think that that's where tiny homes, and especially tiny homes in backyards, can play a really significant role. Because remember, anytime that we can convince somebody who is occupying, a 3 to 5 bedroom home with one or two people to make that transition to downsizing, you're essentially freeing up a home onto the housing market without having to go through the process of plowing another farmer's field and building another subdivision, contributing to sprawl. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to back up here and keep going with what I was at, but we'll talk about that soon. So the housing stock breakdown. Oh, that was all right. That was a misplaced slide right there. This is showing, I just wanted to show a chart that basically shows the amount of homes that has been constructed over the years versus the population growth. Because there's this consensus that we just haven't been building enough homes to keep up with the expansion of our population. And I'd like to point out that, yes, it has tapered off as it's gotten like through from 2000, 2010, 2020. It's definitely tapered off, but it's not like we've completely stopped building homes. And it's not as if the population has just completely exploded. We haven't been building homes at the rate that we had, but at the same time, remember, we have more square footage per person than we ever have before. And that's what this is showing. So it's not necessarily this that we just haven't been building enough homes for the population. It's that we haven't been building enough homes for the population, given the fact that our appetite for square footage has been expanding at this astronomical rate. And here we are in another aspect of the conversation about just building homes that I don't think is really talked about. And that is, well, what if we build too many homes? Does that potentially leave us in a situation where we can be exposed to future downturns in the housing market? I think that if you pay attention to what's just happened in China, I would say that there's a lot of people that would probably agree with that statement, because that's exactly what happened in China, where they essentially built so much homes so fast that they were just really thinking about this as this, like, you know, an infallible investment opportunity. They weren't really thinking about whether or not things could change, or if those homes really were going to be occupied and whether the demand would stay to the point where it is. And China has basically experienced this huge real estate bust, and they're still not over it. And what I believe is that if what we're doing, if people's appetite for square footage changes in the future, or if we have people in the older generations basically all agreeing or all deciding now is the time that I'm going to sell my home and cash in on my retirement savings, I think that there's a good chance that we might find that what we thought was a housing stock that was insufficient for our population, we'll find actually there's a lot of homes out there in the country. And when they get put onto the market all at once, that's going to create a big problem. One of the things about uh, the investment, the private equity investment and corporate investors, is that those guys are really keen to basically buy homes, and then if the values are dropping, sell them really rapidly. This happened in 2019 when BlackRock liquidated their entire holdings of real estate in 2019, because what happened? We raised interest rates for the first time significantly since the recession in 2008, and basically BlackRock smelled what they thought was kind of a plateau in terms of real estate prices, and they figured, hey, we've made our money, let's get out now. and they just liquidated it like that. There's nothing that is going to keep these investment firms from doing the same because, if you don't live in a home, it's a lot easier to just make that decision to just sell it. And so that basically leaves the average Americans, the small time investors who can't necessarily just get out of their home that fast, more exposed. So that is a real concern that I have that I don't think people are talking about very much when it comes to private equity and corporate investment. Here you can see the population breakdown, in terms of the size or just the generations. And you can see that, millennials are the first generation that is actually bigger than the baby boomers. Um, this is Gen Z from 18 and up. So that's not the entire population. That's just the 18-year-olds and up, because I feel like they are relevant to the housing conversation. Here is the total wealth that is owned by each generation. And the yellow line is what is invested into real estate. And you can see that although the baby boomers, they have a lot of wealth that's not real estate, they also have a lot of wealth that is real estate. I think it was the last figure I saw. I don't know if this is completely in line because of the valuation of real estate has gone up so much in the last couple of years, but it was about $19 trillion worth of residential real estate is owned by the baby boomers. And what I just kind of wanted to mention, and this is actually something that gets talked about in more depth in a report called the Coming Exodus of Older Homeowners that was put out by Fannie Mae, is just that essentially when you do the math, if the baby boomers go to sell their homes to essentially cash in on their retirement savings, especially the millennials and the Gen Z, they simply don't have enough wealth to absorb that wealth transfer. And that is kind of like economic jargon for the fact that there's going to be a lot of homes put on the market with no buyers because they're very expensive, and the younger generation just is not wealthy enough to be able to afford that transfer. So this is a slide from that, the coming exodus of older homeowners. This is an older report. It's from 2018. They, I would say the authors of this, it's this guy from University of Southern California and this economist from Fannie Mae. I don't think that they could have foreseen what would happen during the pandemic in terms of the real estate values. I don't think anybody could have quite guessed that. I certainly wasn't expecting it. I didn't expect, if you saw my TED talk from 2017, I had basically said there's no way we can lower interest rates any way further because we're already at record lows. Well, I was wrong. They dropped interest rates to near zero, and I certainly didn't see that coming. And we learned what that is going to do. It basically just makes people's buying power that much more. And instead of actually solving the affordability of housing, all it does is basically drive up the prices because it increases the demand. It doesn't actually bring the price of the home back down to earth. All it does is empower people to go further and further into debt. Um, Here is basically their predictions in terms of they were taking the historic attrition rates, right? So when people sell their homes when they're older, especially when you get from your 60s to your 70s to your 80s, the percentage of people that have to sell their home by forces that are not within their control, this is kind of medical emergencies, even death, is all kind of categorized as attrition. And what these guys were showing was, hey, if you take this big population of older homeowners and you apply the historic rates of attrition, you can basically plan on the amount of homes that are going to be put onto the market in the coming years, um, simply due to the fact that people are dying, and they're getting older. And they're basically showing that, all right, even if people are intending on wanting to stay in their home as long as they possibly can, well, it comes a point where everybody basically has to, go into assisted living or figure out some other thing. And they're just showing that we are going to expect a lot of these homes that are in the hands of older Americans to get put onto the market in the next, basically 5 to 10 years. Whether or not our economy can handle that wealth transfer is something that is questionable. So I don't even know what time it is. I'm probably needing to go a little faster. Yeah. Oh my God. We only got 15 minutes less. I'm going to basically move through this, right? Okay. So here is the valuation of homes, and that's the equity. That's the value of the homes, and that's the equity that they have. This is pretty consistent. Here is the retirement savings of older Americans adjusted for inflation. And as you can see, baby boomers have retirement savings that is actually kind of, within, the same. It's pretty comparable with other generations. But what you're not recognizing is that most people in those older generations were not basically depending on their retirement savings to get them through retirement. Most people had pensions. The greatest generation, 80% basically had a pension. The silent generation, over 60% had a pension, like my grandfather. In today's baby boomer economy, less than 40% have a pension, which means that number in terms of the real estate savings is not comparable at all, because the baby boomers by and large are dependent on that. Here's a chart showing the amount of this is basically the combined silent generation and baby boomers, that essentially you can see only 20% are cited as having sufficient retirement savings. 35% are relying on government sources. So that's basically, Social Security, which is a fixed income, right? 35% are shown as not sufficient savings, and 10% have no savings at all. And so basically what that is showing me is exactly what I was talking about. Older Americans have been using their houses and the value of their homes and investing in it as their retirement savings. And now we get back to what we can do to help people, right? If we know that, we have this housing crisis, we have all of this underutilized space, how can we go about getting our housing stock back in balance with the functional needs of our population? And that's the thing that I keep I kind of focusing my thought process on, is getting our housing stock back in balance with our needs. And so there's certain things that are just making it fundamentally, I'm not going to say impossible, but unprofitable for builders and developers to build small homes. And a lot of it's found in the zoning code. So I'm just going to go through it super fast. Minimum lot sizes. This is a big one. If we could divide our lots into smaller chunks, then you wouldn't have such an upfront investment before you start building your home. But if you have to buy an acre of land, and land is not cheap, in order to build a home, it's like you might as well build a full-on home, or a larger home, because the amount of money that you're going to be saving is really just a fraction of the overall cost. And that's what it really comes down to for a lot of what I'm about to talk about here. Single family zoning obviously is a big one. If you're not allowing other types of homes, like multifamily and apartments that are typically done where the home sizes can be smaller, that's going to impact the supply of smaller homes. Height and density restrictions, that's another way that zoning basically limits apartment buildings and multifamily. Parking requirements is a big one. There's full-on books about what parking requirements do to affordable housing, and it's a big impact. Area ratio, that's another aspect of zoning that basically is, we have mandatory mandatory minimums that are kind of getting dissolved. It's not as bad as it was 10 years ago when I first started looking at this, but there's still a lot of cities out there in our country that will not allow you to build a single family home that's under 1,500 square feet. There's parts of our country that won't allow you to build a home that's under 2,200 square feet. And then we're kind of pulling our hair out about, well, what's going on? How come, where have all the starter homes gone? And we're not acknowledging that actually we have laws on the books in a lot of the cities with the biggest housing crisis that are simply making it illegal to build smaller homes on foundations, right? Setback requirements. That's basically means that, okay, if you have setbacks, if you can imagine, say you allow a lot to be divided, and where you were going to put one home, now you're going to put four. Well, that's going to push the houses, because they're not going to be right up against each other. That's going to push them closer to the edges of the property. And so complying with those setbacks is something that also limits the amount of smaller homes. Parking and impact fees. The impact fees is the biggest one, right? Parking fees are important too, because, you know, if you're going to be dividing the smaller lots and then you're required to have a garage or a parking space, that's going to impact whether or not you can put a home there. But the impact fees, everything that goes into creating a fixed expense before you go and even build the home, means that all of that, if it's a smaller home that's less expensive, that's going to represent a larger percentage of the overall cost. And so it's essentially going to create a penalty for building a smaller home. So instead of doing that and absorbing that and putting it into the square footage cost of the house, builders will basically avoid it, and they will build just big homes because it makes more sense, because the impact fees are essentially a set cost. All right, this is already taking too long, but now you can see down here, restrictions on ADUs and tiny homes. Okay, this is where we come in. And luckily, we've had a lot of luck in the last, 4 years of cities basically allowing ADUs. Not so much tiny homes, not so much tiny homes on wheels, but that's changing thanks to the work of a lot of great people. There are issues in the building codes. Instead of going through all of this, because I'm running out of time, I want to see what you guys are having to say. Um, I'm going to just say the very biggest issue in the building codes. I mean, I'm part of an ICC committee that is actually trying to solve and get tiny homes on wheels into the ICC building codes guidelines. But the biggest issue is that there is no exemption for smaller spaces when it comes to the energy requirements. So the amount of insulation that goes into a wall is basically not considering the square footage that you're trying to heat and cool, which is insane, right? There's three different aspects to efficiency. There's your heat source and how efficient, how much energy it takes for your heat source to do its job. Then there's the thermal envelope, right? Both of those things are considered in the building codes in the energy portion. But then the third element, which is the size of the space, is essentially ignored. And that's absolutely ridiculous. And what I see it as is a blatant penalty that we are putting onto builders who want to build small homes, because the fixed expense of having to comply with these energy standards is one of the biggest areas that is going to balloon the cost, and there's no justifiable reason for it. So, that gets me super fired up. I could give a whole nother talk completely on that. But that's basically my main focus in the committee work, is trying to find a way where we can get our energy requirements, the insulation requirements, put onto a sliding scale. But there's also other things like the fire safety requirements that just, they don't necessarily, like in this tiny home, it's 14 square feet or 14 feet by 8 feet. If there's a fire somewhere in here, I'm going to know about it right away, and I'm going to get out of the house. It's not like a big home where you can have the whole downstairs caught on fire and you're trapped up in a room where you're going to have this big egress window. And so those are just elements. Another thing, like, okay, well, I'm not going to go into it, but there's other elements of the building codes that really should be reformed. Now we're talking about multifunctional solutions, because I do believe that by allowing accessory dwelling units, allowing for incentivizing property sharing, we should be giving people, especially older homeowners or just homeowners, a tax break who open up their homes and rent out a room. That should be done, because that's something that would really go a long ways to helping our country basically solve our housing needs without having to build more subdivisions. subdividing large homes, right? This is very controversial, but it needs to happen because, like I said, just dropping the interest rates is not actually going to solve the affordability issue. It's just going to allow people to take on more debt. Accessory dwelling units, this is very popular. I am a huge fan, but we need to make sure that people allow tiny homes on wheels when they're making accessory dwelling unit laws, because tiny homes on wheels being portable has a lot of amazing advantages. Cooperative retirement communities. So this is going back into solutions for older Americans, right? You know, one of the problems we talked about in terms of the desirability that is keeping people stuck into large homes is that they want to age in place. They don't want to leave their community, right? So you can build an accessory dwelling unit in a lot of places in your backyard. But if you're on a fixed income, a lot of people simply can't, right? It's a big expense to do. Plus, then if you have to then go into, the time comes you have to sell your property, well, you got to upend your life and move. Tiny homes on wheels is a really amazing opportunity for older Americans because you could essentially buy a tiny home in the backyard, put it in the backyard, start renting it out. You stay in your home. Now you got a place for somebody to live. You got a consistent rental income coming in. Uh, if they happen, if you set it up right, then maybe they're a younger person that can help you with the maintenance of your yard. They can be there in terms of being just a resource if you have an accident or something. So there's a lot of kind of mutually beneficial ways that people can utilize property sharing, and accessory dwelling unit laws really open that up in terms of the opportunities. But allowing tiny homes on wheels has an extra advantage in terms of, number one, if you can't afford to build an accessory dwelling unit, well, you could simply rent out your backyard to a nice person who can afford a tiny home, right? They get to enjoy the ownership and the dignity that comes from home ownership, and they're just renting the property. And that's a really healthy dynamic, in my opinion. But it also enables this kind of cooperative uh, uh, partnership. And then also, if you have a tiny home on wheels, this is what I really think is like the future, and a big thing that should be happening is that having a tiny home on wheels in your backyard, if you're an older person who doesn't need the big home, well, you can move into the tiny home on wheels. You can open up that home for a family that actually needs the space. And then when the time comes that your care needs exceed what can be offered, you can basically take that tiny home on wheels and move it into a retirement community where other people of similar needs can kind of pool resources and kind of share the burden of that care. And because you know retirement communities just in general are basically, let's see, how do I stop sharing this? Retirement communities just in general are extremely expensive, right? And so finding a different solution for older Americans that basically allows them to um, pool resources, I believe is a really fantastic way to go. So I had another slide, but I think we are running out of time, and I can't figure out how to stop sharing my screen here. Let's see. Zach, help me out, buddy.
There we go.
Hey, Zach, this is Dallas, Washington. You taking any questions?
Dallas, what? That doesn't sound like
Yeah.
Dallas.
How do you
What?
respond to the rumors that John Weisbarth was actually the real genius behind Tiny House Nation and you were more of a figurehead?
Dallas, I don't know who has been feeding you any sort of like false information, but you better believe that John Weisbarth, if he was actually doing the work, you'd see more sweat stains around his shirt, you know?
Well, I'd love to show you some sweat stains here, but my camera won't turn on for some reason.
Oh, geez. Hey, everybody. Welcome, John Weisbarth. That's not Dallas Worthington. That's
No,
John
Dallas
Wise. Oh,
Worthington. No,
hey,
Dallas
Dallas.
Worthington here. Oh, Jesus. Damn it. You were talking for so long, the tape on my mustache came
Oh
came
my
off.
God. Did I go over time? Man, I wanted to open it up for conversations. I wanted to get John, thank you
Great.
for joining us. This is so
Well, it would
lightning.
have been great to have a conversation, but now it's 3:31 and I have to go.
Ah,
I'm raising money for the Coronado Historical Association tonight.
oh, yeah. Well, listen, we all got our callings. In
Does
this
that make me a
world,
hero?
you know?
Yeah, it kind of does. Hi,
Sean, you're
buddy. How are you?
absolutely a hero in my life. I'm good. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
I know. I know. I wish we could have had more time. Also, did you share the
Is
big news with everyone?
what I
There's
what
lots
I
of big news to share, right?
well, I had a baby. Is that what you're
There.
talking
That's
about?
that's the that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
number one thing I was talking about. You're a
I don't know if you
dad
can
now
see
to a
that
little
my
boy.
head is just barely out of the water. I'm like, barely just treading water, trying to survive here, trying to keep the
You
bags
know
not
what's so
shooting
funny?
into
It's
my
like, yeah,
eyes.
I cannot. So, he's how old? He's like 2 months yet?
Yes, he just turned 8 weeks. And
See?
as far as we know, I think he's good to go. Like, it's so scary as a dad, as somebody I'm used to having control over my own fate. And then here you get into the situation and it's just like a roll of the dice and you're just like
Oh
keep your fingers
man.
crossed. I knock on a lot of wood. It's a
That's just your job. Yeah. You just do
yeah,
that every day.
yeah. All right. Hey, John. So I want to talk to some of these
No.
kind folks that
Oh
have
yeah,
questions.
time's
Did
up.
you read
You
any
can
of
talk to them.
were you reading any of the questions? I don't want to take anybody else's time, but I'll just stick on for at least like, 3 minutes.
Well, I mean, if you
And
didn't want to take people's time, maybe you would have talked quicker. It just
oh,
seems a little selfish for you to go on and on like that when these good people are just trying to get in there. Good people like Dallas, Washington. That's all I'm saying.
yeah, yeah. Well, did you notice if anybody had any questions? I saw somebody said
A lot of there's a lot of comments, a
Mark.
lot of real good
Okay.
chatter in there.
Yeah. So Mark, you were saying that you agree in terms of needing the energy reductions. And
Wait, hang on. Before you do that, I see
yes.
Nick Mosley is on here. I see Nick Mosley's telling me to
Oh.
get him Dallas. And this is an excellent opportunity for us to talk about our podcast because Nick
Oh
Mosley
yeah. Okay.
is featured this week. I think. Did we drop it this week? Zack had a baby and our podcast fell off the map. I mean, so we're totally delinquent. We recorded with Nick a while ago and then the wheels came off because there's a little bouncing baby boy in Zack's life. But we are going again and Nick is on and it was awesome. It was really, really fun. So shout out to
Yeah.
Nick and the name of our
Like,
podcast, Tiny House Tales
yes.
with John
Go
and
listen
Zack.
to
I
it,
think it
guys.
goes
Tiny House Podcast. The latest one was with Nick Mosley. And I hate to say it because I never like to be nice to him because we're kind of in this like battle together a little bit. But listening to it today, he is a really smart guy. Nick,
totally.
you didn't hear I was really blown away. You are a really smart dude and I love the conversation. I think anybody will get a lot from it. Yeah, you can listen on all of the podcast networks out there. It's called Tiny House Tales, and there's
And
a
I lost
lot
my
of good
mustache.
older ones. There's going to be a lot of episodes coming out in the near future. Um, and each time
All
I get
right.
to see my buddy John and we get to do like dumb things like this. And he always makes me laugh. So,
Dallas is out of here. I got to run. Great seeing you, buddy.
all right, go save the Historical Society, John.
Hey, history matters. All right.
Yes.
Bye, buddy.
Okay, so I'm going to be respectful and bow out. I'm sorry that we didn't get to your questions. I hope you guys had something. I hope you got some value from this. And I always want to just crush these opportunities because I care so much about this topic, and there's so much that tiny homes can offer to society that I just really want to do my best job that I can. I'm going to give myself about a C- on this one, but I hope you guys actually enjoyed it.
No way, man. It was way better than C minus. Dude, like you did your research, you did your homework on that, and you put the whole presentation together. You got all the visuals together for people to actually be able to visualize. And I thought that was super interesting when you went through the pie chart and it was like from 1960s or whatever to 2024. And the how what was it, the single adults in a house is almost as many as like families, nuclear families. That's nuts. That's so
Yeah.
crazy. And just shows the need for basically all the things that you're talking about, like the different ways to solve the crisis. So
Yeah. Well, I wish I could have had another chart that kind of did the exact same thing in terms of the size of the home, right?
yeah,
Because that's really what it is. It's a contrast between the way the demographics have been shifting and then the types of homes that we've been building and what's
yep,
happened to our housing stock. So, if
yeah,
there's one way that I can quantify why tiny homes have this potential, this outsized potential to help us address our housing crisis, it's essentially just that idea that we have this housing stock that's way out of balance with the needs of our population. And we could essentially stop building like 4 and 5 and 6 bedroom homes tomorrow and be just fine because our housing stock is just flush with them. What we don't have is those smaller options. And you see it because you see it in terms of the affordability crisis, but also younger families' inability to get a foot in the door on the housing market. And at the same time, older Americans are having just as hard a time kind of going through with downsizing. And so it's we're being incredibly inefficient with the homes that we already have.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, we see
Oh,
baby in the
Sam just
background.
brought Leo in.
What's up? How's it
Okay.
going?
Hi,
Congratulations,
Leo.
Zach. I didn't know that.
Say hi to
That's
everybody.
that's
My
super
brother
exciting.
Sam.
Yeah. Howdy.
You talking about us, and he wanted to come say hi.
Oh,
Yeah. Dude,
he
that's
looks like
super
he's.
fun.
Oh, are you smiling?
So when was
Yeah.
his birthday? Late July.
Here, I'll take him.
Okay.
Yes, July 25th.
July 25th. Okay. I had a baby on August 11th. So we're like
Oh,
6 weeks. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So we've almost got
Congratulations.
little babies. Mine's a little girl. Maybe they'll grow up and get married or something. You never know.
Oh, the worst things could happen.
Yeah, seriously. Dude, that's super exciting. That's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
um
I'm very much in love with this little guy. Look
yep,
at him.
yep. I can
Look at him.
imagine. Yeah, he's all bright-eyed and ready to join the podcast, I can tell.
Yeah, yeah, or get on a mountain bike, one of the two.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
something to say?
Hi. Sounds like you said hi. That's
All
super
right.
fun.
Well, Zach, thank you so much. It's been an honor. And yeah, I'm glad that you found some value in it. And I hope that, you know, maybe there's some other people that are inspired by some of this that can kind of articulate it in a little bit more concise way than I can and go out there and have some influence. I think, one of the things that I have to say is that the next time you hear somebody just talking about the housing crisis and how we just need to build to meet demand, we got to remind people of how inefficiently we are currently using the homes that we already have,
Yep.
because it
Yep.
really provides the opportunity for a third pathway in terms
Yeah.
of getting to the ultimate goal of housing everyone. So
Yeah, option C. I like it. Yeah, no,
yeah.
that's great. And you articulate it really well too. So definitely appreciate that. And I think it's super needed. And yeah, I think, yeah, definitely just more people need to start thinking this way. And I think there's a little bit of like, I don't know, some normal, or maybe not normal, but some people will be thinking like, almost like it's shameful to like either go smaller or shameful to like have to rent out their rooms or do different things like that. But it's like that's not like the case at all. It doesn't have to be like a pride setup, or it doesn't have to like show your value or whatever it is. So yeah.
Well, and I think, shameful or not, I think that there's the fundamental reality
Yeah.
behind
Yep.
what we actually can afford. And I
Yep.
think we've been living beyond our means in a lot of ways as a country, and just kind of leveraging this kind of investment in real estate to kind of like hide the fact that we are doing it. And
Yeah.
and I think it's putting us at risk. It's going to
Yeah.
come back and bite us if we're not careful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of homes that could easily be serving a greater purpose than just what they're doing right now. So definitely
Yeah.
going to help with the
And
crisis.
yeah. And last thing I would say is like, yeah, you don't have to want to live in a tiny house to want to be able to have the option,
Yeah.
if shit hits the fan.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. Like, I'm living in a 1-bedroom condo. Um, and it's great.
Yep.
It works for us and our family. You know, I don't know if living in a tiny home would be perfectly appropriate for us right now, but I sure
Yeah.
as heck want to have the option.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
something really heavy happens in my life, I want to
Yeah.
be able to have that as a backup plan. And
Yep.
I think the one thing we don't have in this country is a safety net, a
Yeah.
sufficient safety net. You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely more important than most people give it thought. So
Yeah.
super
All right.
important.
Well,
Well,
thanks for everything that you do, Zach. Great to see your smiling face. I'm sorry about that jerk John butting in and just
that was
derailing the
awesome.
conversation. But,
That was awesome. Thanks for wrangling him in and getting him on board. It was awesome to have him on there. So
yeah.
always makes it fun
right.
and lighthearted, but really impactful. And like you're saying, like there's a pretty weighty conversation that we're talking about. But I love that you're just diving into it and you can still make people laugh and have fun about it. So
All right.
good
Well, you
stuff.
flatter me as usual. Thank you. I
All
appreciate
right,
everybody.
yep. We'll chat later.
All right. I look forward to seeing the other presentations. Bye.
Yep.